Winter came down hard on the frontier that year. Not gentle. Not forgiving. It crept through cracks in the earth and settled into bone, howling across the open land like something alive and angry. Snow crusted the ground around a scatter of lonely homesteads, and the wind worried at every wall it could find, searching for weakness. That was when the laughter started. A small knot of neighbors stood off to one side, boots planted, breath steaming, watching a woman dig beneath a raised cabin. Their laughter wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. It carried sharp in the cold, the kind that cut deeper because it was shared. Men shook their heads. Someone spat into the snow. Someone else muttered that she was wasting her strength, that she didn't know her place, that the ground would beat her before winter ever loosened its grip. She kept digging. Her hands were raw. Her coat was thin. Each strike of the shovel rang dull against frozen earth, sending a jolt up her arms. She paused only to catch her breath, then went back at it, carving space for a crude chimney channel she believed could pull heat up through the floor and trap it inside the cabin. No one believed her. Not the neighbors. Not even the man who owned the place. He stood on the porch, arms folded, face weathered into stillness. A stoic rancher, long used to being left alone, long used to people laughing before they walked away. He'd survived winters worse than this with nothing but stubbornness and a fire that never quite reached the corners of his home. He told himself this was no different. Told himself she'd quit when the ground beat her down. But she didn't. The wind clawed at her skirts. Snow dusted her hair. Laughter rose again when her shovel struck stone and jarred her backward. She steadied herself, wiped blood from her palm, and dug around it instead. There was no pride in it. No performance. Just need. The rancher shifted his weight. He could call her off. Tell her to stop making a spectacle. Tell her winter always won. He'd said those words before, to himself mostly. Instead he stayed silent. The mockery rang out across the frozen land, bright and cruel against the gray sky. And beneath it all, the steady scrape of iron against earth continued. Because she knew something they didn't. If this failed, it wasn't just another idea laughed into the snow. It was another winter meant to break them both. The cabin never truly warmed. Fire snapped in the hearth, but the cold pressed in from every seam, every warped plank and hairline crack. Breath hung in the air like smoke. Frost crept along the walls, silvering the corners before dawn. Sleep came in shallow stretches, broken by numb fingers and the ache of joints that never fully thawed. She stayed anyway. The rancher had told her it was temporary. One night, maybe two. His voice carried no cruelty, just distance. He watched her from the far side of the room, arms folded, boots planted wide as if the cabin itself might shift under unfamiliar weight. He didn't ask why she knew about chimneys. Didn't ask why she'd chosen his place. Out here questions were liabilities. She moved carefully, mindful of invisible lines. She kept her tools neat. Spoke only when needed. When she did, it was plain and practical. "Heat's rising wrong," she said once, nodding toward the ceiling. He grunted. Nothing more. Mistrust lived between them like the cold. Quiet, constant, shaping every motion. The neighbors' laughter still echoed beyond the walls, carried on the wind. He felt it as pressure, as risk. She felt it as proof. Proof that if she failed, she'd be gone by morning. Night after night, the cold tested resolve. The rancher woke to find her already up, breath puffing as she sketched lines in the dirt by lantern light. Angles, drafts, paths for smoke. He shook his head once. Pride flared. Then faded. "Pride didn't keep you warm. You don't have to prove anything," he said at last. She looked up, eyes rimmed red from cold and smoke. "I do," she replied. Short. Certain. Quiet resistance followed her through the cabin. The way he set rules without speaking them. The way he watched her hands. The way he stood between her and the door when voices carried from outside. She felt the weight of being tolerated, not trusted. Morning came hard and white. The wind cut sharper. Laughter drifted again from down the slope. She pulled on her coat. He thought she was leaving. Instead, she stepped beneath the cabin and began to dig. The ground was iron. Her hands bled. She worked until the light thinned and the cold found new places to settle. When he told her to stop, she didn't. "I'm staying," she said, breath shaking. "Until it works." The cold had owned this cabin for years. She meant to take it back. They worked mostly in silence. Not the awkward kind, just the kind that comes when words would only slow the hands. Frozen soil cracked beneath iron tools. Each strike rang sharp in the winter air, then vanished into the wind. At night they sat opposite each other by a fire that barely held, boots steaming, breath fogging, listening to the cabin creak like it might finally give up. It was during those long evenings that her story began to surface. Not all at once. Just pieces laid down like kindling. She spoke of winters that killed quietly, of waking to frost on blankets, of fingers that went numb before dawn, of burying someone she loved because the cold had crept in where heat should have been. People think warmth's comfort, she said once, staring into the flames. It ain't. It's the difference between mourning and never waking. She'd learned what she knew the hard way. Not from books. Not from town men with clean hands and big opinions. She learned from watching smoke move wrong, from fires that choked instead of warmed, from cabins built by pride instead of sense. Heat don't rise if you don't give it somewhere to go, she explained, tapping the dirt floor beneath the hearth. And cold don't care how tough you think you are. The rancher listened without interrupting. He didn't ask questions, didn't offer sympathy, just nodded once slow. He understood law spoken plain. He understood winters that taught lessons by taking things away. His own past crept in through habit rather than confession. The way he flinched when the fire sputtered. The way he fixed things himself, even when help would have been easier. He hadn't always lived alone. That much was clear. Pride had kept him upright after grief had tried to fold him. Asking for help had felt like weakness. And weakness out here got things buried. Neighbors offered once, he said finally, eyes on the flame. Long time back. You didn't take it. No. She didn't ask why. She already knew. Their bond didn't come from shared laughter or sudden trust. Came from endurance. From hands working side by side in frozen ground. From silence that didn't judge. From two people who knew the cost of surviving alone. By the time the fire burned down to coals, something had shifted. Not hope. Not yet. But belief. He began to wait for her judgment before setting stones. She began to speak without apology. And the cold, still brutal, still merciless, no longer felt like the only thing in control. Warmth, she'd said, was survival. And for the first time in a long while he believed her. The laughter didn't stop all at once. It curdled. What had started as chuckles across the frozen yard sharpened into voices raised on purpose, meant to carry. Men leaned against fence posts with arms crossed, their breath puffing white as their words turned cold. They stopped calling it foolishness and started calling it danger. Dangerous to waste time. Dangerous to tamper with things that had always been done one way. Digging holes won't change winter, one of them said. Cold don't care about clever ideas. She kept working. Her hands were red and cracked, knuckles bleeding where the shovel slipped against frozen stone. She didn't look up. She had learned long ago that ridicule fed on attention. Still, every word landed. Every laugh pressed in. Then the warnings came. Quiet ones, spoken close to the rancher's shoulder. About neighbors losing patience. About resources being wasted when everyone was struggling. About how a man's reputation could sour fast if he let foolishness take root under his roof. Tradition was invoked like law. This was not how things were done. This was not her place. She'll get you killed, someone muttered. Or worse, make you look weak. That night, the rancher stood in his doorway longer than usual. The fire inside had burned low. Outside, the woman kept digging by lantern light, refusing to surrender daylight to doubt. Snow creaked under boots as a neighbor approached him, voice low, deliberate. Send her off, the man said. Before this turns ugly. The rancher said nothing. He watched the shovel rise and fall. Watched the woman pause only long enough to wipe her brow, then continue. He thought of winters past, how the cold had taken things from him without asking permission, how tradition hadn't saved anyone he'd buried. For a long moment he almost spoke, almost told her it wasn't worth it, almost chose the easier side. Instead he stayed silent. And that silence was the first crack in the crowd's certainty. Because for the first time, when the frontier demanded he fall in line, the rancher did not move. The ground fought them every inch of the way. Frozen hard as iron, it rang beneath the shovel like a warning bell. Each strike sent a shudder up the woman's arms, biting through gloves already stiff with ice. She didn't curse. Didn't complain. She just shifted her grip and struck again, breath fogging the air in short, steady bursts. The rancher watched at first, silent, arms folded inside his coat. He'd spent a lifetime measuring people by how fast they quit when the land pushed back. Most did. Winter had a way of sorting belief from bluff. But she kept going, down in the trench beneath his cabin, carving space for a flue that everyone else swore would collapse or choke or fail the first real storm. "Angle it," she said once, voice hoarse but firm. "Wind'll pull the smoke if we give it a path." He hesitated, then nodded. From that moment they worked together. He braced the supports while she shaped the venting by hand, fingers red and cracked, blood spotting the snow before freezing black. A hammer snapped in the cold. A sawtooth sheared clean off. Each broken tool felt like the land laughing, but they replaced what they could, improvised what they couldn't, and pressed on. By dusk, their shoulders ached and their hands shook. Inside the cabin, she set a pot over the fire, thin stew, mostly broth, but it steamed all the same. They ate without speaking. Wood popped in the hearth. Outside, the wind tested the walls. He finally spoke. "You ever done this before?" She swallowed, wiped her mouth with her sleeve. "Not like this. But I've frozen before. I know what fails." That was all she said. It was enough. The next days blurred into motion. Dig. Reinforce. Seal. Clay packed into gaps. Stones stacked where wood would warp. He learned to read her pauses, not weakness but calculation. She learned his rhythm, when to hand him a tool before he asked. They fell into silence that wasn't empty. At night, exhaustion laid them flat. Sometimes they sat by the fire without words, just breathing, watching sparks climb the chimney they were daring to trust. Other nights they shared what little warmth they had. Two figures hunched close, boots steaming, snow melting into puddles at the door. Respect grew there. Not spoken, earned. By the time the sky darkened heavy with the promise of a real storm, the trench was finished. The vent sealed. The supports set deep enough to defy the frost. She leaned on her shovel, chest rising and falling hard. He looked at the work, then at her. Winter was coming. But they were no longer facing it alone. The storm announced itself before it arrived. The wind shifted first, dropping low, turning sharp, carrying a weight that pressed against the land like a held breath. The sky darkened to the color of old iron, clouds rolling in thick and fast. Snow followed hard behind it, not drifting but driving horizontal sheets that erased the world inch by inch. The neighbors saw it coming and closed their shutters with grim satisfaction. From their windows, from behind stacked firewood and thick doors, they watched the lone cabin crouched on the rise. Smoke curled from its chimney, thin, steady. A foolish thing, they'd said. A joke dug into frozen ground by stubborn hands. Now the storm would tell the truth. Inside the cabin, the wind screamed like it wanted entry. The rancher stood near the hearth, boots planted wide, listening to the walls creak and complain. Every winter before this one had been the same. Cold that gnawed through bone. Fires that burned too fast and warmed too little. Nights spent awake waiting for morning to save him. He'd learned not to hope. Hope froze faster than anything else out here. The woman crouched near the chimney opening beneath the floor, eyes tracking the draft with a focus sharpened by fear and faith both. She fed the fire carefully, not too much, not too fast. The flame caught, pulled upward, just as she'd promised. Smoke rose clean. No backdraft. No choking haze. The cabin held its breath. Then the warmth came. Slow at first. Almost shy. A change so subtle it could have been imagined. The rancher frowned, flexed his fingers, felt sensation return where numbness had ruled for years. Heat traveled along the floorboards, crept up the walls. The fire stayed alive, steady, disciplined, obedient to the draw she'd carved beneath the earth. Outside, the storm intensified. Snow piled against the cabin walls, burying the lower logs, clawing at the door. Wind battered the roof hard enough to rattle nails loose. Somewhere nearby, a tree cracked and fell with a sound like a rifle shot. The neighbors watched, waiting for smoke to choke, for fire to die, for the cabin to surrender. It didn't. The chimney held. The rancher moved through the cabin, checking corners, sealing cracks, reinforcing shutters as the woman had taught him. They worked without speaking now, no room left for doubt or argument. This wasn't theory anymore. This was survival. Every sound outside tested the structure. Every gust dared it to fail. And still the warmth stayed. The rancher stopped near the window, peering through frost-smeared glass. Visibility was gone. The world beyond the cabin had been swallowed whole. For the first time in his life, the cold was out there and he was not. He laughed once. A short, startled sound, like it surprised him as much as it did the silence. He pressed a palm to the wall, felt heat where there had only ever been ache. "You did it," he said. His voice cracked. The woman didn't answer right away. She watched the fire, the chimney, the air moving the way it was meant to. When she finally spoke, it wasn't triumph in her tone, just relief. It worked because it had to. The storm raged on through the night. Hours passed. Snow climbed higher. Wind howled until even the neighbors began to doubt their certainty. They expected smoke to stop. It never did. They expected fire to fail. It burned steady. Some stood longer than they meant to, staring at the stubborn line of smoke rising into the storm like defiance made visible. Inside, the rancher sat back in his chair. Exhaustion heavy but unfamiliar peace settling into his bones. He watched the woman as she slept near the hearth, face softened by firelight. She had been laughed at, dismissed, warned away. She had stayed. And now, in the worst storm the frontier could throw at them, the cabin was warmer than it had ever been. The rancher stared into the fire and felt something dangerous stir, hope. Not the fragile kind that shattered under expectation, but a solid thing. Earned. Built with blistered hands and stubborn resolve. Outside, the storm screamed itself hoarse. Inside, the fire held. And somewhere between wind and warmth, the rancher understood this was no longer just about surviving winter. This was about what happens when someone refuses to accept the cold as final. Morning came slow, like it was afraid to look. The storm had spent itself in the night, howling, clawing, testing every weak seam it could find. Now the wind lay down, exhausted. Pale light spilled over the drifts, and the land held its breath. The cabin still stood. Its walls were rimed with frost, its roof heavy with snow. But from the chimney, a thin ribbon of smoke rose straight and steady into the cold sky. Inside, the air was warm. Not the sharp, temporary warmth of a fire fighting a losing battle, but a deep, settled heat that clung to the walls and lingered in the floorboards. The rancher stood still, breath slow, as if any sudden movement might break the spell. He pressed his palm to the wood near the hearth. Warm. He hadn't felt that kind of warmth in years. Outside, neighbors gathered at a distance. The same men and women who had laughed, who had shaken their heads and placed their bets on failure. No one spoke now. They watched the smoke rise. They watched snow slide from the roof in heavy, defeated sheets. Proof stood there, plain and undeniable. The woman stepped out onto the porch, her boots crunching softly. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. Her work spoke for her. Hands cracked and raw, clothes stained with soot and mud. But she stood taller than she ever had. Not because they approved. Because she had endured. The rancher joined her, silent. After a moment he nodded once. Not gratitude dressed up in words. Respect. By midday the sun climbed higher. Icicles dripped. Snow softened. The land began to loosen its grip. Smoke kept rising steady and sure. That cabin had been cold for a long time. So had the man inside it. Both were warm now. Out on the frontier, justice didn't always ride in with a badge or a gun. Sometimes it came quieter than that. Sometimes it came with frozen hands, aching backs, and the kind of resolve that keeps working even while others laugh. Progress out here was rarely welcomed. More often it was mocked right up until it worked. They laughed at her because she didn't look like an answer. Because her idea didn't sound right to men who had learned to survive by repeating the same old ways. But winter doesn't care about pride. And the cold doesn't respect tradition. Only persistence. So let me ask you, as the fire settles low, whose ideas have you dismissed too quickly? Who have you laughed at because their solution didn't fit what you already believed? And if you'd been standing there in that frozen yard, would you have joined the laughter, or picked up a shovel? If this story stirred something in you, leave your thoughts